Hello guys and welcome to the launch pad. Pretty much with this ship we've got a really simple ascent profile. We're going to remain at full throttle until those fuel tanks get about, for the radial stage, get about half full, and then we'll begin to throttle back to keep our speed low. But we're not going to need to throttle back all that much or for all that long because we don't have an excessively high thrust to mass due to us using a skipper down here rather than another tank in the mainsail. But this keeps it smaller and more efficient and all that good stuff, so it's not a bad rocket design, we just need to keep the throttle up. As for when we turn, I think I'm going to turn around probably 10 or so kilometers. The advantage of doing it this way is it's nice and square, etc. I'm going to turn only like 70 degrees, and then I'm going to turn to 60 by 13 and 90 by 20. This sort of way of figuring it out, it helps you approximate a real curve without actually, you can't turn exactly the right speed with every rocket unless you make jumps, so one thing I have found is that since version 0.21, the advanced SAS system fitted to every capsule, it can be a little bit soft for rockets without a great deal of attitude control. I think this is probably a knee-jerk reaction to the fact that there's lots of spares stage mainsail rockets, and all of these mainsails will turn, and that means that that means that we've got a huge force tangentially to the vehicle, and they used to shake because they just used to alternate backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards, and the ship seems to fall apart as most players found. But the problem with the softer is that the rockets tend to drift just very slowly backwards and forwards, and because they're not putting that straight, it's not actually massively efficient. Now, I didn't end up throttling down because whilst we were going a little bit faster than the ideal speed, it was never all that much, so it wasn't really worthwhile trying to vary the throttle. There goes our radial stage. Without our radial stage we are very low thrust to mass. It's not a great feature, but like I said, this rocket's got plenty of guts to go into the moon, so I'm not too worried about it. When we get our apotheosis to about 70 kilometers, I'm going to turn and start to burn for the moon, because I'm not going to go to a circular orbit with this. I'm just going to burn straight to the moon. But controlling it from the map screen is what I'm used to doing, for the simple reason by watching this time to apotheosis, we can actually see if that's increasing or decreasing, etc., and adjust our angle of attack, I guess, relative to that. Because if we point towards the horizon, our apoapsis time is going to go down. If we point towards the sky, it should go up. We want to hold that, I don't know, 30 seconds to a minute. If it starts to go too differently to that, we've got problems. Like I said, it's going to be at the lower end of that with this rocket because we've got a pretty low thrust to mass. Now, something I don't like about the way the game system works is I have to scroll out massively to set the moon as the target. This is because I've got another rover landed. So whenever I try and click on this, it's going to go Kerbal X set as target. No, I don't want to select that. I want to select the planet that it's on. Surely that's the bigger target. As I can 42, we're not actually picking up height fast enough. Come on. I probably leaned over a little bit too aggressively with this rocket, but like I said, we've got plenty of delta V to get there. I would be redoing this if I was going for somewhere like Elu, because we pack a massive fuel load to do that. So a wrong ascent profile can use thousands of litres too much fuel. And this, you're getting the ascent profile completely wrong, would still be, it would still only be a minor percentage of mission fuel that we would end up wasting, because we're going to use a large portion of our fuel actually, first of all, doing a 10 kilometre lift, and then we're doing the transition and a whole lot of adjustment work, and that's probably going to use more of our fuel than actually the ascent itself. Right, now we're going to drop this stage. Like I said, one of the advantages of doing this straight burn to the moon is that debris I just dropped is actually going to re-enter the atmosphere. It's not even going to ever get to make an orbit. If we were going to a parking orbit, dropping that would have ended up the space junk. Anyway, with that dropped, we're on a much higher thrust mass. We've got half the thrust that Skipper engine had, but instead of carrying a huge amount of tanks of fuel, we're literally just carrying one. And due to that I just overshot badly. Well, it doesn't matter too much, we should have enough fuel. This is Kerbal Space Program, we're going to deal with it. Pilots fail, deal with it. As I said, I usually controlled from the map screen, but I was trying to be a bit more cinematic for the camera. Anyway, it's not a problem. Here we go, and there's an encounter. Slightly? No, not quite. Want to be on the other side. There we go. Nice encounter here. We want to get that down to probably a bit more than that, but I would recommend low 20s or high teens to be the ideal place for actually coming in. I mean, 100's not ideal, but you don't really want to be colliding with the moon either. These engines are just much too powerful actually. It's causing problems. It's going to be even harder to do our correction burn here, because it's going to be tiny meters a second. But we'll just go straight in. It's not the safe way. The safe way of landing on the moon is to get to effectively a ridiculously low lunar orbit. The advantage of this is that we're going to skimp just above the surface and have a good deal of choice in landing site, etc. But we can do a direct landing. It is more fuel efficient. So if you're on a very low delta V budget, like you're attempting for a weight challenge or anything, that's the way to go about it. Oops, that's not the marker. Now that's good enough for our purposes. 0, 0. Now it would be more efficient if I was landing on a planet or something. I'd worry about it to adjust our to adjust the height we're going to come in at from the halfway in the orbit than from here. But like I said, we can actually. Why is the spaceship not showing up? Unusual bug. Normally a ship would show, but it isn't, so I'm just going to deal with it. Now that we're in closer, it's less efficient to burn, but that lower efficiency actually also can be an advantage because it means that we're getting less, effectively we have less ability to change our situation, which means it changes less rapidly, which for a rocket which has too much thrust like this one to be easy to control, makes it easier to control, I guess, in a nutshell. If you're going, again, crazy on efficiency terms, it can be a huge advantage because you can only adjust from a maneuver node in increments of, I think, 0.1 meters a second is the smallest increment that it adjusts in. So if you're miles from a target with pretty powerful engines, it can be a bit hairy to try and get, the fine sort of adjustment done. If you do it do the course adjustment from further out, you save most of your fuel, and then do the fine adjustment further in, you can get the fine trim better. So here we are, we're now over the moon. Now, I'm aware I waited till after the maneuver node, which is probably sub-ideal, but one advantage to waiting after a maneuver node and burning, like in that situation, is you remain closer. If you're decelerating burning, wait till after you remain closer to the periapsis. If you're accelerating burning still before, but slightly more into the time. Burning half either side is fine for the maneuver node because the maneuver node assumes an instantaneous point. So you want, for maximum accuracy on the maneuver node, you want to burn perfectly half either side. However, for maximum efficiency, this isn't the case. You want to be burning continuously at the apoapsis or periapsis, which is constantly moved by you burning. And so burning 50% either side of a maneuver node set up at the apoapsis or periapsis actually doesn't maximize your efficiency. Now, I know that it would be more efficient to wait for our lander, but I'm just going to force this one down because this looks like a fairly decent landing location. And it's going to be a bit quicker if we force it down than if we wait for it to land in an efficient fashion. I also haven't used a similar outrigger design. I know that these engines on these fuel tanks will give us probably one thing I will do is rotate the ship to 180 degrees. By keeping it set to horizontal nav ball like that, it becomes more like flying in Flight Simulator or whatever. When I push W, it goes down, etc. Which can make it a bit easier to control when you're getting into your final approach and your landing. You can sort of go, where am I pointing? Like, we see the ship on screen drifting one way without looking at the nav ball, and it's easier to be pushing the wrong key if the ship's back to front. So it's worth noting you can get serious advantage by rotating the ship so that it remains square to the nav ball, I guess. and rotating the camera so it remains square to the ship likewise. One interesting note about this pod though is the door is actually on the other side. Common logic would say if we're pointing at the ladder and the door and the rest of it, we're pointing at the front of the ship. But as you can see, this is actually the front of the ship because it moves in the same direction as the button pushes. Now, landing speeds with these large legs and struts, we could probably tolerate anywhere below about 15 meters a second landing. However, probably I'm going to aim for considerably tighter margins than that. About, I don't know, less than 10 kilometers a second would be the ideal. But we'll see what we get. One thing about landing at midday is there's not much terrain shadow. You've probably heard it a million times given the most recent Reddit challenge, but one thing that the Apollo mission did is they chose to land only at dawn, because this gave them the maximum amount of daylight should something go wrong, because they had solar panels for the buggy, I believe, with batteries and solar. The ship itself was fuel cell based, but there was something that was solar dependent, or maybe it was just the visibility for light. But the other advantage to doing that was when they landed, the 20-degree angle was their recommended landing, because that meant the sun gave a long shadow to any undulations in the landscape, which made it obvious where was flat and where was rocky and so on. For us, we don't really need any of that though. Landing in Kerbal-based program is far less precise. Ah yes, the power of the decoupler. An advantage of a micro rover like this one is kerbals can push them fairly effectively, which is a really good thing given the tendency for these things to land on their backs, etc. Come on, you derpy kerbal, push it. Hello, wakey wakey. We have YouTube videos to record. Bob. No, it's Bill. Bill, wake up. This is not a time to be sleeping, especially laughing and grinning while sleeping. Come on. It's the rover. Come on, Bill. Bill. Okay, at least I can use the Eve bag to try and stand them up. What? Collisions with kerbals are still a little bit experimental, it would seem. Here we go. Get under this thing and we should be able to flip it. I think I've just jammed it into one of the landing legs. Oh well, keep pushing. Either something will break or we end up where we want. In this case, we got what we wanted. So I guess that's really 101, the advantage of light rovers rather than heavy rovers. You can push them around. Anyway, let's go for a bit of a drive on this thing. Now, as I said, we're right up at the top of the suspension travel now. because their weight's effectively much lower. This lower weight also means, you can probably tell just as I'm doing this, we actually drift slightly because we have less tractive effort, because your grip on a tyre is usually measured as a, what is it, it's a newtons of force to cause it to break traction per kilo of downward force. And normally you would, per kilo of weight placed on it, and that's of course done on Earth, not kilo of downward force. So that's why on the Moon it's pretty critical to have, the softer springs, so there is some spring compression still. It's why it's also pretty critical to have a long wheelbase to keep us stable, because we will break traction and slide. If you haven't seen any of the videos of the Apollo missions driving around the moon buggies, like Apollo 15 and so on, I would highly recommend it, because those things spent as much time airborne as on the ground. They just, we bounced. Whoops. Something to note though, you can actually control, using the throttle, brakes and steering, you can pretty much cause this ship to, rover I should say, I can hold it close to two wheels and so forth. There doesn't seem, what is it, I wonder, that causes it to do that? It's something I found with nearly all wheels, but doesn't seem to occur with the landing gear. Maybe it's something to do with how the springs work, or wheels clipping to the ground, but there's something that causes a sudden compression of the suspension and flipping over. Something I found with the other rover that's currently landed, it doesn't get very far at all because it's using much larger tyres. It's pretty heavy. The second you get suspension compression on one side, you're going to get catapulted. Anyway, another thing that's worth noting, and just something to do a bit more fun with the rover than just turning around and talking about it, is with collisions. There's a common misconception, if you've got two vehicles travelling in opposite directions, that if you add their speed together, that you can add the speed for the impact. This is actually false. And you don't have to take my word for it. There's actually a Mythbusters episode, I believe. I haven't seen it, so I don't actually know. I believe there's a Mythbusters episode where they cover this, to do with a car impacting a truck or something. I don't know. But there we go. I think that's the end of this one. Oh no, we can save it. There we go. Good save. Jolly good driving, Bill. Anyway, the reality is, effectively, the speed of each vehicle would have an identical collision to impacting a wall at that speed, with an exception of the fact that the other vehicle also has crumple zones and so on going for it. So you actually receive less damage impacting a car going the same speed as you, at the same mass as you in the other direction, than you would driving into a wall which had no give. This is one of the very interesting factors to do with collisions in space, because the distribution of force, if you will, is dependent on the mass in that situation. When small objects that are space debris collide with stations, the actual effect on the station is far more minor when they're coming head on to the station than when they collide to it at high angle, because head on, the change in speed in the station with regard to orbit is insignificant, and the station's pretty well designed to run into things itself, because it's any static junk even that's decaying is going to be moving slower than it because it's decaying from an orbit. And you'll run the station into it, so it's designed to take front impacts. On the other hand, the piece of junk that's in a higher orbit than it on one side, so it's in an elliptical orbit, with one side of its orbit higher than the station, can hit the station on the sides or back, which are considered low collision risk zones and have considerably less armouring, and so the damage is much higher, even though the relative speed can be a lot less. Anyway, I think this demonstrates most of the deals with rovers. Something that's worth noting that works fine in Kerbal Space Program that was written up for the Apollo missions is you can never drive further from your spacecraft than you can walk back, because if the rover breaks down, you're stuffed otherwise. And this was a serious problem for their range. In fact, it limited the range they could use the rover in so much that they actually ended up wavering it for one of the missions to do the Munar speed record, because they needed to run it in a straight line on smoother terrain for a certain distance. But in Kerbal Space Program that isn't really an issue, because, as I'm going to show after I plant my flag here, we can fly back down to the rover. We have 500 meters a second of delta V, so we can go from a standing start to 500 meters a second if we were going in a vacuum, no other forces, just on the EVA pack. I'm just going to call it rover landing site. I know it landed down there, but that's really the significant point. So flying up and then across like this, I can fly probably, if I use all of my fuel and we take into effect the acceleration of gravity downward that I'm trying to counteract, I could go not quite into a Munar orbit, I don't think, though I could be wrong there. But from my experience, it's not quite a Munar orbit. However, you do bowling ball pretty well. Which is kind of funny. For whatever reason, kerbals actually have a lower resistance doing this than they do walking. If you land on your feet, going slowly, the kerbal will stop from flying pretty quickly. If we slide like this, and I don't press any buttons so he doesn't attempt to get back up, we just keep sliding, we can actually travel pretty fast. I believe, I'm not sure quite who it was, there was one of other YouTube channels that I was watching recently where they set up kerbals and did bowling into a moon crater. This is worth noting that they almost caught up with the rover rolling on wheels, just sliding a kerbal, because they have such low dynamic friction. For whatever reason. And the other funny thing about them I've found personally is they have incredibly low air resistance, which means if you're trying to build a command seat drop pod to try and land from orbit onto kerblin, it was better landing, then you end up having to place the kerbals at the very front, because they have the same, well, they have a different mass to drag set up than the rest of the vessel does. Nearly everything in Kerbal Space Program has, I think, 20% of the drag for mass, or for whatever unit of drag they use, which is what that 0.2 is. Kerbals seem to have less than that. Anyway, that's pretty much shown off on the moon, shown how to roughly land it for this design of rover. We're just going to return kerblin and hopefully I'll see you all next time. Actually, we probably don't want to go to 90 degrees. we can probably go straight. Again, inefficient tricks to save time. Actually, one thing I will note, if you hold Alt and you press the forwards key, time warp, we can use the time acceleration like you do in the atmosphere of kerblin, even though we're in space. This is highly significant because it allows us to use the engine. If you ever tried to fly an ion probe, you'll be very glad you knew that trick. And that's our kerblin return. With that, I shall see you all next time. I've been Sheep in the Cart. I hope you enjoyed the video.